Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the latest episode of the Digital Adoption Show, where we host top L&D, HR, and tech luminaries and talk about what's next in the future of work and tech. I'm your host, Neha Smriti, Growth Marketing Manager at Whatfix. And today we are going to discuss how learning can transform lives for better. We have a truly special guest joining us today. Andy Lancaster is a renowned Chief Learning Officer with over 30 years of experience in transforming organizations through innovative learning and people development strategies. His journey has taken him from the world of design and technology to leading learning initiatives for vulnerable population and finally to a decade-long tenure at CIPD. He is also the author of two best-selling books, Driving Performance Through Learning and Organizational Learning Communities, which have reshaped how we think about learning in the flow of work and the power of social learning. Currently, he leads Reimagine People Development, but some people say he spent 5 years in prison. That's one story I'm really eager to hear, Andy, today. But there's so much more to Andy than his impressive resume. Today, we plan to explore the life of this L&D expert through his personal journey, getting to know the real Andy behind all the expert hats that he wears. Without further ado, Andy, welcome to the show, and I'm thrilled to have you here today.
Yeah, it's brilliant to be with you, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation. I'm not quite sure where this is going to go, but that's the exciting part of it.
Yes, that's the whole idea. We just want it to be as authentic, as human as possible. So yeah, before we actually jump to the main discussion, I have a quick question for you. Like it's a short segment where we just explore the distinct, more personal side of our guest. So Andy, is there a passion or activity outside of work that's particularly close to your heart? And if that there is, what is it?
Yeah, there is, and I guess I'm kind of known for learning and development now. But my first degree was in design, so I was a furniture designer. So I specialised in furniture design and silversmithing, making jewellery, and it was a real passion. That's what kind of drove my first degree. And I now find as I get towards, I guess, the later part of my career, I'm reconnecting with those creative roots. So a real passion is I'm back working with wood and crafting things, and recently did some geometric wall art made out of some absolutely beautiful American ash. So I just encourage people, as well as our work lives, we need to have those other passions. I guess if I can have a cheeky second one, I'm on the board of a charity focused on eradicating leprosy, a really, really brutal disease. So I'm really enjoying being part of that. It provides, the charity provides medical care and rehab and community support for those who are facing leprosy. So I guess those two things now outside of work, yeah, design and working around leprosy are, I guess, two passions I have.
That's really great. In fact, the first one, when you were talking about it, I remembered how Steve Jobs once spoke about learning calligraphy, and which he later implemented in how the fonts would appear for Apple too. So when you were speaking about the design bit and how you love woodwork and jewelry making, so
Yeah,
that's something I really resonated
it,
well with.
it's a really interesting one, isn't it? The number of people who I find going back to a passion. So I guess maybe for people listening in, you may have just forgotten something which was really important for you. So maybe think back some of the things which really motivated you.
Perfect. In fact, for me, it has always been reading.
Yeah.
Because of work, and so you sometimes just can't go back to reading, but I make sure that I keep on doing it. And even as a child, my dream was to own a library of sorts. So that was for me, but I would definitely go back to that passion of mine. So thanks for
Brilliant.
letting us know yours. Okay, moving on. There's a fun bit which we call triple strike. It's like a quick rapid fire. We have three fun, quirky questions for you. The first one is, if you could chat with an animal, which one would you choose, and what is the first thing you would ask? I mean, for all the pet owners, they would just say that they already do it. But if it was for you, what would be that animal be, and what would you ask them?
I mean, you did give me graciously sent some of these questions ahead, so I had a bit of a chance to think. I was watching TV the other night, and there was a program about the octopus, which is probably one of the last creatures that you would want to chat to. But I was just absolutely amazed at this. I mean, it's arguably the most intelligent creature.
Yes.
You know, it can camouflage itself. It's got a complex nervous system. It can do jet propulsion, can even regenerate its limbs. So I was kind of watching that and just thought about this podcast. So I think I would want to chat with an octopus because they're incredibly intelligent. I guess the question I'd ask is, what does the world look like from your perspective? and understand a little bit about their unique vision and how life looks for them. So octopus is going to be my choice. And what does it look like to be an octopus?
Nice, nice. That's really, even I am intrigued, like, yeah, what it would be like for them because they're so smart. They
Very
would
smart.
be looking their world in a very different lens from us. So yeah, that would be one hell of a conversation, I must say.
Yeah.
Okay, if you could ask your future self one question, what would it be?
Yeah, I'm going to do a bit of a stunner on this one, I think. I'm going to ask myself, why did you think you could overlook your health and well-being? Now, there's a little bit of a background to this. About 10 years ago, I wasn't looking after myself. I was allowing work stresses to get on top of me. And I did have a bit of a crisis. A really serious health issue came up, which was related to stress. So I think it's a question which I probably would look back and just say, why did you think you were invincible? And maybe for all of us on this one, it's so easy just to keep going and ignore small signs about health and well-being. But I think for all of us, both physical and mental health are really important. So I think I would challenge myself as to why I thought I could get away with that.
Yeah, that's so true. In fact, that's one lesson everybody can take away from this. Like, we get so involved and so absorbed in the current life that we just don't take care of our health. But later, like once you start aging, is where it dawns on you, like, oh, if I could have just maybe taken an hour of my time, just gone for that walk,
Yeah.
just jogged, and it doesn't even take as much effort. You don't need to like hit a gym of sorts. You just need to walk if you have to, and just keep on taking care of your health. Maybe just have that yearly health checkup. You will get to know so much about your body because that's something you have to spend the rest of your life with and nothing
Yeah.
else.
Yeah, and I think, if we want to go faster and better, we have to learn to slow down. It's a paradox, isn't it? So I think, again, for me, even this weekend, there's got to be some time to slow down. So yeah, I think let's all focus on health and well-being. And if anybody's struggling here right now, just take a moment just to think about your own well-being because it's so important.
Yeah, true. And both physical and mental, as you said.
Yeah.
So both are equally important. That's so amazing. Okay, so my last question from this bit is, if you were to design, because you are an L&D expert, so definitely we wanted to have this question for you. If you wanted to deserve, if you had to design a learning experience around a non-traditional subject of sorts, like how to survive a zombie apocalypse, what would be your first lesson?
that's just that's got to be the most random question I've ever been asked on a podcast. I've been on a few. So, how to survive a zombie apocalypse? I guess I'd go for, let's bring some AI into this because AI is really important for all of us. So, I think what I would probably do is I'd probably create something called friend or foe.
Oh,
Because if you're in a zombie apocalypse, you've got to be able to work out who's a zombie, who are your friends, and who's in transition. So you could have an AI powered image library, which would allow you to look at images and learn to spot the early signs of zombification. Yeah, and with yes or no prompts to sharpen your ability. So, yeah, I'd want to get my ability to spot zombies really sharp, and I'd do that through AI, I think.
with that answer, I must like, I'm assuming like in future, if we are actually hit by a zombie apocalypse, they'll just reach out to you. Please design something for us. Because Andy knows
So,
about
yeah,
who is your friend, who is your foe.
just
Please.
make sure you've got you just make sure you've got your smart device in front of you, so as the zombie approaches you, you can make a good assessment around that.
Yes, friend
But
of,
yeah, I think AI is going to change. Well, yeah, we probably will come on to it
yeah,
in a bit. But
he
AI
really would be.
AI is going to change so much, isn't it? But yeah, I think zombie identification AI learning would be what I'd be going for.
That's really amazing because AI is something everybody is looking forward to, and this would be one bit they would really want to explore. So yeah, thanks a lot for those answers. Those were really fun
No
answers,
worries.
Andy. And let's move to the real bit of our podcast where we would be asking you some serious questions. So shall we start?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, so my first question for you, Andy, is we would love, in fact, I know our audience would love to know your journey as a CLO. And in fact, to know more about your 10 years at CIPD and then when you transition to Reimagine People Development. But for
Yeah.
me, if you could also touch bit on, there's a bit where they say you have spent 5 years in prison. What's the story behind it? Because I am too excited to know about it. So yeah, your 5 years in prison story.
Yeah, let's start in prison. It's a really fascinating. I use this one when I go to parties and I haven't got much to say about myself. When you're chatting to people and they say, "Oh, yeah, what have you done?" I say, "Oh, yeah, I spent 5 years in prison." So it's absolutely true. So I've had a very eclectic career path, which I'll just explain in a moment. And again, for people listening in, be encouraged that sometimes we have huge plans about how things are going to work out, but sometimes the way we progress is by responding to opportunities which kind of come out of side field. So I didn't actually do anything wrong, but I was head of human resources and learning in the UK for one of the big rehab organizations working with people with substance misuse challenges. So this would be anything from heroin addiction through to alcohol addictions or whatever. And there was 5 years when I was responsible for the people team who were working in community projects, in prisons and residential. And as part of my work, I got to go into prisons right inside, not just the visitors wing, to look at supporting people who were looking to change their lives. And it was really interesting for me because it was at a time when there was someone in our own family who was battling with substance misuse and mental health. So it was quite something that was very close to me. And it was just a very, very powerful time for me to learn so much about myself, because I was in an environment of very radical change, and you couldn't help but listen and observe what was going on in the lives of others and understanding how that applied, because we all have areas of life which we want to see change. So it's very powerful. Going to work in those circumstances, can imagine what it looked and sounded like. It wasn't like a typical job, but very powerful to see people restored in their lives, back to work. And remember one situation where a dad said, "I've got my son back." It's just very powerful. So that was my time. That was kind of mid-career, but a very, very powerful time working to support people who are going through radical change.
Right, perfect. And I feel that that whole journey of yours, like that chapter of your life, actually has created the other aspect. Like later, once you join CIPD or once you
Yeah.
transition, those learning from that bit of your life would still resonate today. And
Right.
it's such a, and it just sets a stage for our audience too, like how much impact certain aspect of your life or certain like period of your life could make later in your career too. Like even if it's a
Yeah.
personal journey or a personal story, it just makes or breaks the later half of your life. So that's great.
And I think, we look at, I mean, I had, as I said, a very varied career. Started in design, then taught and lectured, and I worked in a big American corporate working computer aided design where I was an instructional designer. Then obviously I worked in, rehab. I also worked in adult social care, working with, as a head of learning, working with older people with Alzheimer's and dementia. And I think you often, for people listening in, it's sometimes interesting to think about like a golden thread which runs through your career. And I think developing potential has been in all of these roles, albeit in very different ways. So I think it's a really interesting one, that sometimes we may plan a very linear thinking about our career, but sometimes it's those brilliant opportunities that come which we need to grab. And certainly that underpinned my move to CIPD. When I was working in social housing with the older people, we won some amazing awards for some work the team did. And I ended up speaking at a CIPD conference. People kind of say, "How did you get to be head of learning at CIPD?" Well, I spoke at a conference about disrupting management development. As a big audience, I really went for it. And at the end, there was a woman standing by the stage as I came off the stage. And she said, "Could I have a word with you? I'm one of the directors at CIPD." And I'll be absolutely honest, I thought I'd really messed up massively and said something really inappropriate. And she took me to one side and said, "We're looking for a new head of learning, and we've just listened to what you've been saying and how you want to approach learning. And could we talk to you?" And as a result of that, I ended up at CIPD, which was just an incredible change. And we then took CIPD from what was then quite a formal training learning organization to
Right.
provide learning anytime, anywhere, all over the world. So that was So that was, even going to CIPD was a bit serendipitous.
True. And there could be one learning out of that bit is you should always put your best foot forward, because you never know the next conference you are at or the next time you spoke to a person, he might bring forward a career toward like an opportunity for you, which might just change your life. So that is one great takeaway. Like you
Yeah,
should always be out there prepared, like anything can change. And like you said, it's not always linear. You might have some plans for yourself, but life just keeps on giving different and distinct opportunities which you need to identify and just grab onto them. So that's
yeah. and
that's
and even my move into consulting was really short. But keep it very short. But about 2 years ago, I had major eye and shoulder surgery,
right.
and I was off work for about 3 months. So it was quite major. And the person at CIPD who was second in department took over while I was off and did an absolutely brilliant job. And when I came back again, my boss said, you know, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I don't think I should take it back on because Steve's done so brilliantly. So at that point, I transitioned at CIPD a bit into consulting role. And eventually that kind of took off, and I've now got my own consultancy. So sometimes even the difficult things in life can provide opportunities for change. So yeah, it's not always just about the easy things. Sometimes difficult things are really helpful.
True, that's true. So, okay, going forward to my next question.
Yeah.
You are also the author of two best-selling books, like we told our audience. And you mentioned you wrote these books as a way to work through your thoughts on transforming learning. I would just want to know what was the idea, like what led you to actually start penning down your thoughts? What was that one turning point? And also, if you could just give the key messages from these books to our
Sure.
readers, like what would be their takeaway from these books?
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's a brilliant question. They say that there's a book in everybody, and I think that probably is true. But I think having written the second book, if you want to write something, it's got to be something which really captures your imagination, because it's quite hard work writing a book, and you have some very dark moments when you think, am I going to be able to do this? So I think the first one, I've got it here, the first one, which was driving performance through learning. This one was because at CI we were thinking about how we needed to move learning more in the flow of work, and I could just chat a little bit about that in a moment, about what the book's about. So for me, I wrote it as a way of working my own thoughts out. So books essentially are a gathering of ideas. So I've got lots of ideas. So I think it's really important that the writing process itself is often about organizing thoughts and structuring and sequencing your thinking, or even distilling important ideas. And again, that's why it's so important for all of us to keep a notebook and a journal. And when I was a design student, we used to keep a sketchbook at all times. So I encourage everybody listening here, journaling and keeping ideas is really important. So, but for that one, that was really important. Yeah, the second one, which was organizational learning communities, which is out recently, was because I was really struggling thinking about how to make learning communities work. So it is, I guess the book is an outcome of distilling ideas. So I guess my encouragement to those listening is, if you're passionate about something, start keeping a journal about it, because that's the basis for where books come from.
True, that's so true. Like you might just have an idea which you just keep on jotting down, and then maybe it turns out into something substantial. Plus, you just have to put in the idea in writing, is what I feel, to make it actually come true. So unless you do that, it's just an idea. That's my feeling.
Yeah.
Thoughts.
And you have to read other people's stuff, don't you? I think what's inspired me is there's so many brilliant people in learning and development, and in many ways little fragments of other things that people have shared then sparked my thinking. I was writing these things down. So it's really important, I think, if you are passionate and listening to this and you want to write a book, make sure you read wider, but then just gather all your ideas. Eventually a coherent picture comes out of all of these ideas. So that's kind of, yeah, how my writing has come together.
Okay, it's really fascinating, like to hear how actually writing helped you clarify your thoughts.
Yeah.
It's actually, to our readers, obviously, I'll be linking these two books in the
Thank
description
you.
down below. Yeah, so you can just check it out for yourself. But if you had to actually give what these two and how these two books are distinct from each other, I know one
Yeah.
talks about communities and learning through community building and everything. The other one is more
Yeah.
towards learning and driving performance. So if you could just
Yeah.
maybe throw some light on how these books are
Yeah.
distinct and what exactly the reader would be getting into if they decide to get these books.
And that's a really good challenge, isn't it, to have like an elevator pitch for a book. So for me, driving performance through learning is all about how do you deliver learning in the flow of work in the moment of need. So many of us are familiar with, in the past we might have gone a course or a program, but there's real good thinking about people need to access learning in the moment. So yeah, so that one's all about learning in the flow of work. And essentially what I do in that book is say how learning and landscapes in organizations are changing, how we need to redefine learning. And there's some new foundations we need to think about, things like diagnosing needs and tracking impact and designing that responsively. That's the foundation. We really need to know that we're designing for a business problem.
Right.
But then there's all sorts of new approaches like self-direction and coaching, curating content, digital AI, all these kind of things. So the book, the first one is really about how do you make that move into learning in the flow of work. Now, the second one, organizational learning communities, this one, this one came out one chapter in Driving Performance Through Learning, which I kept getting asked to go and speak at conferences. And I suddenly realized that this whole thing about fostering and building learning communities is really important. And whilst we're all in communities, in the sense we're in a community today as part of this podcast, it's not always easy to build these. And I had quite a lot of failures where I tried to develop learning communities and not done very well. So this book was very much exploring how do communities benefit all of us in terms of our development. But then there's some very specific things about how communities can help organizations. And then again, like we spoke about, I gathered loads of thoughts and I came up with a new model with seven, it's called 7Cs, of the things that you have to do to facilitate a new learning community. So again, if you're interested in that one, if you're passionate about learning communities, gathering people together, organizational learning communities will help you do that.
Yeah, that's true. In fact, we recently, like a few episodes back, we hosted director of Learning Guild, and we spoke about building communities, and she had some amazing ideas around it. But I feel like if you watch that podcast, plus if the people buy this book, they will know everything that is out there to just know how to build these communities and what could be, and in fact, the whole nuance of community learning itself. It's an old idea, but now we have started realizing like how important it actually gets. So yeah, I would definitely recommend these two books to our listeners.
And incidentally, I did 4 podcasts which are free with the book. So if you buy the book, you get to hear the podcast too. So there's some media around that. So yeah, I'm buzzing around the community. So if you want to, I mean, obviously do link up with me. I'll be very happy to do that via LinkedIn or a website. But if you're fascinated about communities, that would be a great read for you, I think.
Perfect. That would be great. Okay, so my next question to you, Andy, is you talked about spending a lot of significant time working with vulnerable populations like individuals facing homelessness, addiction, dementia. Can you throw some light on how these specific experiences shaped your understanding of learning and transformation? Like, because it would be so distinct for each of these population, it's different from how we actually do learning in enterprises, organizations. But when it comes to these challenging population, it gets difficult. And it always has those kind of learnings you would have gotten can be implemented in the wider audience also.
Yeah, there's some really big lessons which carry from working with people who have specific needs. And in one sense, it doesn't matter what learning situation in we have a need. But I think the things that came out of working in those specific sectors, firstly, learning is holistic. We often think about the mental or cognitive processes, but it is about the whole person. It's about physical, it's about social aspects as well. So I think for me, there's an importance in understanding that we've got multiple perspectives about creating a holistic environment where people can learn. And I think that was heightened working with people with specific needs. There's also, I think, for a learning designer, there's a real sense of, I increase my empathy to understand that we need to understand what learners are facing. And often those are complex needs.
True.
So learning must be tailored and human-centered. So I think there's a big push now around human-centered learning, which I think is absolutely right. And I think as well, thinking about resilience in learning, it is quite tricky sometimes to learn. Sometimes it's a pleasurable experience. Sometimes learning is difficult. But again, particularly working with people with addictions, there is a resilience around learning where you have to support people to push through. So I think that's really key. So I think holistic, empathetic, resilient learning is something I think we can take away for everything we do. And we're not just creating a course, we're creating a life-changing experience for people. And those factors are really important for us.
Yeah, and I feel that could be implemented in how we look at organization while learning also, because not every learner is as similar to the other person. They'll have different needs, they'll want different, their approach to learning in itself would be different. So you have to have that empathy to realize what exactly these people want and need. So that could be one great takeaway from your experience working with these people.
It takes me back to my early design. I mean, if you're designing products, you really need to know what your end user wants. It's so obvious, isn't it? And the best products we have are designed so well. So in one sense, learning is a product, and we need to understand our audience so well to design a great solution.
Yeah, in fact, even in our organization, we have this concept of user we talk about. It's basically keeping your user at the center, or whoever is going to use it at the center of when you're designing something. It could be learning experience, it could be product, as you said. So that bit actually resonates with keeping the person who is going to use it at the center of will just give you the best result possible. So yeah, that's
Smart.
thanks for
That's
sharing.
good thinking. I'm
Yeah.
with you, totally with you.
Okay, next, I would want to know and talk about you. When we were having this discussion, you mentioned disrupting a very traditional management development during your time at CIPD. I would want to know like some of the key changes you actually implemented and how did that transform organization? Because we'd love to know things that happen at an organization level and how bringing these kind of changes, it's very difficult. We know that. So if you could talk more about
Yeah.
how you disrupted that whole traditional management you were at CIPD.
That's a great question, isn't it? And it's moved quite quickly, and it will move increasingly quickly with AI, how we disrupt learning.
Yeah.
So I think that disruptive process, as I said, began when I worked in social housing, which was the stepping point to go into CIPD. So I
Right.
think the disruption for me, the key one was what I explained around the Driving Performance Through Learning book, was this: we need to enable people to learn in the moment. And that's a very fundamental change. So for many organizations, and as I said, going back to CIPD at that time, the offering was very much around courses. And suddenly we get into this flow where right now, someone in your organization needs to do some development, and we need to be really quick and responsive. And there's lots of thinking around this. You've obviously got Josh Berson's Learning in the Flow of Work. There's things like Harold Jarkey has got the whole concept that actually doing work is learning. Then you've got 70-20-10. Obviously, be careful of the numbers, but the whole concept that the small proportion is formal learning. So I think that the disruption is how do you rethink and represent learning so that people can grab it in the moment. And for us as a team, it changed the way we designed learning. We had to think very much, as we've just said, human-centered. What does the folks need? And it obviously then brings in the need for digital devices and you know, these smartphones, I know there's some bad stuff around smartphones, but they are so useful for that. So it was a whole new approach to designing. And I think as well, learning rather than large chunks of learning, what we're looking at is really thinking about small learning and resources. So I think what we did is we launched the CIPD Learning Hub, which allows people to access learning when they want to. And what was just absolutely incredible, we did some of these massive online courses, free courses. So there's another aspect of disrupting is to make resources available. We had over 1/3 people went through some of those programs in over 180 countries. So I guess the disruption, it's a mindset thing, I think, for us as learning professionals to think differently and to think what the learner needs and to think how can we resource them in the moment. And yeah, it involved coaching and collaboration, obviously communities as well as another way of doing that. So yeah, let's move from formal to informal, I think, around learning.
True. And in fact, like how you spoke about any kind of change, this when we talk about disruption, it's more of a change you're trying to bring in an organization, and it starts with changing the mindset. Unless those stakeholders who are deciding for the company, for the employees, for the customers, if they don't have that change in mindset, I don't think any kind of digital transformation initiative or change management is going to be, it's going to come to its fruition unless they have that mindset change. So that is one great learning.
And that takes us back to rehab because, again, change starts with your thinking. It's, you know, that's a very profound thing, and often that requires pre-thinking. You know, what the steps I need to even make to convince myself that we need to change. So I think that really segues in beautifully with my experiences in rehab, where thinking change, mindset change is the first approach and the first step to seeing a bigger change, I think.
True, that's so true. Amazing. So my next question, again, it's coming from our previous discussion, and plus the in introduction you spoke, there was a time in your career when you actually decided, like when you came back and you decided to step down from the role because you felt the successor has arrived. So I
Yeah.
guess, is it easy for everyone, especially when you are at that position, to be in that shoe and just decide that, okay, now is the right time to step down? I want to understand your thought process behind it, what led to it, and how can people, when, because this would be a learning from other people who are in the similar situation. Like, when do you decide is the right time to step down and let somebody else take over? So, what was your thought
Yeah.
process behind it, and what could be the few learning other people can take away from here?
Yeah, that's such a profound thing, isn't it? And I haven't always got it right, by the way, at times in my career. So I think so just to kind of quickly paint the picture again. So I'd had my surgery and I hadn't anticipated it was going to be as tough as it was. It was quite challenging. So I think the learning from it is we are stewards of what we do. These roles don't belong to us. I mean, even though I've got my own consultancy now, in a sense, you're a steward of something. And I think part of stewardship is knowing when to pass that on to someone else. That's quite a skill. And it's really interesting. I think often we leave it too long before we press for change. Right. And I think when I was writing organizational learning communities, it was really interesting that perhaps the greatest boxer of all time, Muhammad Ali, the majority of his losses were in his last 5 fights. So he'd reached a point where I guess he'd gone beyond what he could, practically do or effectively do. And I think that's so often the case that maybe we leave it too long. So I think when I came back and I saw Steve doing so well, what a brilliant guy, and doing so well, I realized from my stewardship, it was time to pass that over. So I think it is about understanding that we exist in a delicate ecosystem, often in organizations. We're only part of it. And our role is to help the whole ecosystem survive. And I think great leadership also gives things away. I think I've learned that through directors in previous roles, that you've got to be good at giving stuff away. So I guess the learning from it is we all have seasons in life. We sometimes don't realize that a season will end when we're in the middle of it, and it, but I think the key for those listening in is know the season, know that there probably will be an end to the season, and the skill is spotting when you can positively pass that on to someone else and create space, because sometimes it's only when we create space that the new thing comes. So that, those are a few thoughts from deciding to step down, and great to see Steve doing really well. And hey, as a result of this, I've now pioneered my own consultancy, which is very cool.
Yeah, that's actually great. And just a follow-up question, because that intrigued me to think, if somebody spot a talent but would still not know that whether they would be able to fill in your shoes. So do you think that there should be like a transition time where they might be shadowing you and you see them working on the same things that you are doing, and once you feel that yes, they're ready, should that be an approach for people to just, when they think that they have spotted that person who can fill in their shoes but they're still not sure, should that be an approach?
That's such a brilliant, you got me really thinking there. What's really interesting is when we've been in a role for a long time, normally we get quite good at it.
Yeah.
And in that sense, we set the bar quite high. And it's sometimes really difficult for someone else to come in and take that on, because we've got so used to doing it. It may seem almost easy to us when it isn't to others. So I think a key thing is to recognize that all of us were a bit rubbish at what we did when we first started. That's the reality, isn't it? We might look really on top of it, but most of us know we weren't. So I think there's an issue that we need to step back and allow people to make it their own role, to recognize they will do it differently, and that's absolutely okay. And if you've got a little bit of control freakism, which I do have a little bit of that, you've got to put that on one side and give space for other people. So it will look different. It will be different. I know CIPD is very different, and that's cool and that's great, but make space for other people to do that. And in a sense, then you might move into something where you need that space as well. So don't be afraid to hand things over. It's possibly the greatest growth opportunity for someone when you do hand something over. So just stand back and let them be brilliant.
Yeah, that's so true. It takes a lot of humility and foresight to actually know when to step aside. And plus, like you said, you should not compare them to who you are today, because you should compare them to the person who had started doing the same bit. That would be a better comparison, because now it just like, even after doing, like if I'm doing this podcast, it now comes naturally to me like to just talk. But I remember the first day I did it, I had my jitters, I was nervous, and any other person who comes in will have the same kind of energy. So I can't compare them to be who I am today, and same goes for other people also.
Yeah.
So yeah,
no,
comparing them to the first day you actually joined in.
And you do a brilliant job. This has been so easy, so you've facilitated. So I think that's true. And I don't know whether you find this, Neha. Also, when you get experienced in a role, you can cover okay when things come up which you don't know, because you've got experience. So sometimes I get to speak in front of audiences, of thousands of people. It doesn't mean that you're not nervous, because you absolutely are. And sometimes you feel really rough before you go on because you're so nervous, but you learn to cope with it. And I think that's part of how we do. So when we allow people to come through, they've got to find their own space to be able to learn to cope with those things. So, and I think it's good sometimes to say, even though I might have been in this a long time, this is still, you know, today, this is even this, I had no idea where we're going. So you just have to trust it, don't you? So that's cool. Yeah, that's good.
You have to be trusting, and you just have to believe in them for them to just shine through.
Totally.
That's such a great discussion we had right away. And I just feel so, there's so much to take away from this discussion. So yeah, thanks a lot for sharing. Okay, so finally, we have come towards the end of the podcast. So any parting thoughts, Andy, on future of learning looks like to you, and through the lens of all your experiences, the distinct bits, 30 years of your career, what does this future of learning looks like to you? And any parting thoughts you would want to give to our audience?
Yeah. Let's draw some parting thoughts on this podcast chat, because there's some really important things that have just emerged from our discussion. So learning has to be human-centered. And so if we're really passionate about learning, we've got to think about the individual. And I mentioned some things around working in sectors where there were very specific needs. So I think we need to understand the holistic human-centered approach to learning. And that means we need to provide people space to learn. So we've just said there as well, when people come into roles, they need to make it their own. So I think learning going forward is more centered around the learner. We need to provide more room for self-direction for people to learn in the way that's important for them. We've also mentioned digital transformation in the pod as well, which is really important. So digital, mobile, AI will be more important. So we need to understand about how we can leverage those methods to make it more appropriate. And also just the whole thing around bite-sized, curated, in-the-moment learning. So it's now more, I'll call out Nick Shackleton-Jones as he's got a great quote that it's more about resources than courses. And I think that's true. So I think all of these things, it's putting the learner at the heart of what we do. And when we put the learner at the heart of the design and the solution, then we've got the chance to create absolutely life-changing opportunities for people.
That's so true. That's so true. And yeah, that's just brings us to the end of the podcast. But I am so happy that we had this discussion. So it has been truly enriching. And like I said, your journey has been so inspirational. And that's why I wanted to have this conversation with you. It was unique. And I am so glad that I got to explore the real Andy behind the CLO, behind the great leader that you are, and behind the best-selling author, if I say so. And really, truly amazing bit, Andy. And thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today. To our listeners, stay tuned for more content like this and featuring incredible thought leaders like Andy here today. And we are available on major podcasting platforms, including Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Whether you are at home or on the go, our podcast is your gateway to learning about latest trends in L&D, HR, and tech. I'm your host, Neha, signing off. And thanks, Andy.
Neha, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much.